So, Dharma friends, so we have said that so when this bliss of great one-pointedness is experienced, even though a condition of non-distraction exists, it doesn't last. For meditative experiences, drive it away. So there is this condition, a state of non-distraction, but then due to non-distraction, an experience of great bliss arises. And when that arises, one may become attached to that experience. There is 3 kinds of meditative experiences that arise in our practice of calm abiding. It is bliss, clarity, and non-thought. And when it says here, it doesn't last, it doesn't last because those meditative experiences drive it away because we become attached to them. So attachment here means that you think, oh, this is nice, and this is how I want it to be. I want this. This is what I want. And so when that feeling arises, you should recognize that with clear mindfulness. So also you don't have to think, I don't want to have that experience, but also you shouldn't think, I want to have that experience. So just sustain mindfulness, then this feeling of this is so nice will go away. And as it goes away, the quality of clarity increases. So what happens is when the experience of bliss arises, that leads to the decline of clarity. So this is how you should practice here. And so nowadays, when we practice meditation, it is actually quite difficult to really achieve stability in one-pointedness. And so we sustain mindfulness. And with mindfulness, you recognize when a thought arises. Oh, I'm afflicted, you know that. And this knowledge already takes some of the power of this affliction away. For example, if you have an aversion against a person, then you recognize, oh, there's this aversion. But even though you recognize it, the aversion's still there. And when it's still there, we cannot yet call that state a state of single-pointedness. So you recognize the aversion instantly, first of all, and then you reflect on its fault again and again. And later, when the aversion arises, and it's already gone when it arises, thoughts just arise and go like that. When there's no feeling left behind whatsoever, then awareness has attained a freedom or autonomy. And this is what we can understand to be single-pointedness. So in the teachings, it is explained that there are different divisions. Single-pointedness has 3 major levels: the lower, the middling, and the great single-pointedness. And then each of these 3 divisions is again divided into 3. But when one reaches the highest point, called great one-pointedness, then great one-pointedness is the realization of the lowest stage of freedom from conceptual elaboration. So this is how these steps are interlinked. And you can also read more about that in books. There is the Dharmakirti Shalung, the instructions by Dharmakirti on the 5-fold path of Mahamudra, which explains the way in which those 4 yogas gradually arise. So you can read about that. And you can also compare what is mentioned, described in these scriptures with your own experience, and then really see, this is where I am at. And then it says, so even though one realizes freedom from conceptual elaborations, there still remain many moments of forgetfulness. So first, like during the single-pointedness, one-pointedness, when one reaches freedom from conceptual elaborations, this experience, this meditative experience of bliss gets lesser and clarity increases. And so previously, when one reached this great one-pointedness, there is a state of continuous clear awareness. So you have an experience of I am being non-distracted throughout day and night. So this is the experience that you gain. But then again, there still are some moments of forgetfulness. And so, first of all, when one reaches the point of freedom from conceptual elaboration, being free from elaboration means that there are one doesn't need to conceptualize anything any longer. And that means the thought arises, and the moment it arises, it is recognized and liberated. So it doesn't remain. No feeling ever remains. So that is the freedom from conceptual elaboration. So now again, you can look at your own mind. Am I free from conceptual elaborations or not? For example, today, if you get angry at someone, you recognize instantly that I've gotten angry. And then already the feeling of the anger goes away. And then when you meet that person, you will be able to talk to them normally. So then you can know that actually I have attained this state of freedom from conceptual elaboration. So what happens is that normally we think about what happened in the past, we entertain the past, and we anticipate the future. So, for example, you think that this person is always doing that, is always doing something harmful. So in the future, he probably will do that, this and that. So such conceptualization is absent in the freedom from conceptual elaboration. There's no such a feeling. And when that is absent, we call it the freedom from conceptual elaboration. There's no need to think about, conceptualize anything whatsoever. And so then there still remain many moments of forgetfulness, is that even though one doesn't conceptualize and thoughts are liberated, there still are moments where one doesn't sustain complete mindfulness. So there sometimes the state of non-distraction from a moment disappears. And then it says in this way, whenever you're mindful, you're practicing. So whenever you're single-pointed, whenever there is mindfulness, that is when awareness is free, has autonomy. So that means you will not become controlled by afflictive emotions. Awareness is held with stability. So that is when you are practicing. When you're in the state of practicing, that is when mindfulness is held with stability and you're not being controlled by afflictions. But when you become forgetful, you slip into ordinary delusion. So when you are not mindful, you slip into ordinary delusion. You're accumulating karma with body and speech. For example, you get angry and then you say something harsh. Then you think about it over and over again. And so this is what is referred to as meditative equipoise and post-attainment have not merged. And then when you rest in meditative equipoise, you are like a child seeing a temple. There is no grasping it, good or bad, in reference to the form seen. So when you're resting in meditative equipoise, you're like a child seeing a temple. When a child sees a temple, it sees the temple, but it doesn't discern between, it doesn't know what's this and what's that. So it does not engage in grasping. There's no grasping of thinking this is this and that's that. For example, if we know, then when you see a statue of a deity in the temple, then you recognize, oh, this is this deity and that's that deity. So the child doesn't grasp in any way like that. It sees everything. It sees the temple, but it doesn't enter into grasping with regard to what it sees. And then likewise, there is no grasping at sounds, the objects of the ear, as being pleasant or unpleasant. So when one hears sound, one does discern between pleasant and unpleasant sound, but one doesn't grasp at it. So one doesn't think that, oh, this is so pleasant, but this kind of feeling doesn't arise. And also there is no unpleasant feeling where you feel, I don't really need that sound. So there is no feeling like that. One recognizes the subtle thoughts of attachment and aversion, of whether or not they have arisen. And if a thought of this is pleasant arises, then it stops right there. And if a thought of unpleasantness arises, then one will be able to place the mind within a state of equanimity. And so in brief, therefore, habitual imprints cannot be placed within the mind. So then, thus the mind abides within a state of practice. Abiding within a state of practice is when awareness remains single-pointed, remaining unmoved by conceptual thoughts. So awareness is able to remain with stability. In Dzogchen, for example, it is said, hold clear awareness with stability. But this is a very important line in Dzogchen, actually. Then it says, when the mind abides within a state of practice, not the slightest focal point of something to be meditated upon remains. So there is not the slightest thought of, I have to meditate. That is when the mind and space become non-distinct. It is the union of clarity and emptiness. Clarity is the state of non-distraction. Emptiness is the space-like nature. Miller Ripa had said, mind and space are not distinct. So at that time, at that point, the mind really becomes like space, not different from space, but it's kind of a small space. And if you practice this again and again, it becomes vast space. And then the thing seen and the one who sees it have merged into one. So when the mind becomes empty, there is no notion of, I have to meditate. The one who meditates, the meditator and the meditation have all merged into one. And at that time, as it is said in the Mahamudra teachings, do not think a single thought, just look at the true nature of mind. When there is no thought in the mind, that is when you can see the nature of the mind. The nature of the mind, which is empty like space, and clearly knowing, you are aware of this nature. And when you're able to remain within this state for a prolonged period of time, then without even having to analyze or examine the mind, the understanding, the knowledge arises instantly. You instantly know that this is it. This is the clear and empty nature. And at this point, great bliss is experienced. This is the nature of the mind. If you're always able to remain within that state, you experience a state of great bliss that is free of all suffering. Then you realize the nature of my mind, within my mind, there is no suffering. Suffering doesn't exist. So sometimes this knowledge arises at a moment when there are no thoughts within the mind. So this is where you gain certainty. And so then it says, a shear crystal clear, vivid presence. So this relates to the introduction of Mahamudra. First, it says sheer. Sheer here means the clarity, the mind that is brilliantly clear. For example, when there is something important that you have to do, then you're very clear about this. Yeah, there is no doubt or hesitation in your mind. You know that that's it, that's to be done. The mind is very clear. So that's the sheerness. So it's another name for clarity. And then this crystal clarity is that the clarity aspect is clear, yet it is translucent, like a crystal. It is empty. So that's a name of emptiness. So basically, these two together are another word for clarity and emptiness. And then this vivid presence, that is, this clear and empty nature of mind is neither on the outer level nor on the inner level. It's not inside nor outside. It is not on the ground, and it's not somewhere hovering in space. It's translucent. For example, when it's raining, there's a mist that comes from after the rain, and the mist is not on the ground, but it's kind of translucent, pervasive. And so when we are introduced to Mahamudra, this is how we are introduced to. For example, if you have a map where you're looking for a location like a city, you know that on this ground, that's where that town is. So here it is not in this sense in terms of what ground, where is it? But we don't think far away, but we think very directly in this moment. The mind is just like space. There's no distinction. So this mind, this vivid presence here is a mind that doesn't analyze the location as of the environment, the surroundings of where it is in terms of location. There's no examination. So it is vividly present in a very vivid, as in a very direct way. Directly and without investigation. So just like this mist in the sky. Or when you come into a town, you see it, but whatever you see, you don't conceptualize it. There's no conceptual investigation happening. And then it says, like an intrinsic silence that simply abides, no fixed thought of this is meditation remains. So this intrinsic silence that simply abides, that's a very important concept. And Gampopa first trained and practiced under the Kadampa Geshes, and there he already had attained the qualities of the 8 Bhumi. But it was only when he met Milarepa that he realized the naked, ordinary consciousness. So this intrinsic silence that is always abides, it's always there, is, for example, samsaric sentient beings, worldly sentient beings, when they work hard, then they get very tired. And then when they can finally rest, they feel so happy. So at that time, you're actually resting in Buddha nature, but we don't recognize that. Ordinary beings don't recognize that this actually is the nature of the mind. Then there's one quote by Chamgyung Kongdul from Calling the Guru from Afar, and in there he says, this is the unfabricated, innate natural state, but I cannot keep to this. And he also said, my own mind is Buddha, but I never realized this. So even though one's own mind is Buddha, it is always there, it always abides there. We don't recognize that. And if we recognize it, we cannot keep to it, we cannot sustain it. So this intrinsic silence here, it refers to the naked, ordinary consciousness is the same. And it is recognized, for example, in a very ordinary sense, when you work hard and then you're really exhausted, and then you rest for a bit. And in that moment of resting, there is not a single thought in your mind. You actually are resting in the natural state of the mind. That actually is the great bliss Dharmakaya. The natural state of the mind is actually greatly blissful, this space-like nature. So therefore, Jamgyal Kongtrul had said that this unfabricated, innate natural state, this is it, but I cannot keep to this. And then he also said, this is how things really are in their natural state, but I have no trust in this. So we need to trust in this ordinary, naked consciousness, as Gampopa had called it. And Gampopa had said, it is from a Buddha who was born as a human, referring to Milarepa, so that through him I had recognized the ordinary naked consciousness as the nature of the mind. And when you see that, all the qualities of a Buddha arise from that. When you remain within that state and recognize the nature of mind, this is what we call the view of the inseparability of karma, of samsara and nirvana, of self and other. So first, you recognize that self and other are not separate. And then you recognize that Buddhas and sentient beings are not separate. When you recognize this non-duality, you come to the state of one taste. So even though it is described in many different ways, in many different words, the meaning here is very important. And you have to remember, keep to this meaning. So sometimes when you're resting, read the books and remember that. This is how we sustain a state of Mahamudra. So when you are working hard and then you are really tired and you're resting, if you are a meditator, at this time, at this point, you can recognize this is the nature of the mind. And this is the state of Mahamudra. So then you just rest within that state and let be whatever thought arises. And so at that moment, this state is what we call Mahamudra, or it is Dzogchen, it is the Buddha. So that realization is Buddha, and there is no other Buddha than that. So even though it is described in many different ways, there's really just one essential meaning that it all points to. And it is that meaning that we have to realize and sustain. This meaning that needs to be sustained is this state of non-duality. This is what it means to see the essence of freedom from conceptual elaborations. So at this point, you recognize the essence of the freedom from conceptual elaborations described in the sacred scriptures, and so forth. Realizing this is to see the lesser state of the beginning state of the freedom from conceptual elaboration, and this is how it is described in the sacred scriptures. And so if one were to give it a name, this is described as the realization of the absence of an individual self. One has seen that none of it, I, me, or mind itself, truly exists. So there is no grasping in the mind whatsoever. There is no grasping at a self or at other. There is naturally no grasping at the true existence of things and our concept labels in the mind. So things become naturally empty when the mind rests in its natural state. And therefore one realizes the absence of an individual self. So there is no thought of existence or non-existence. So there is also no thought of it doesn't exist, nothing exists. It just naturally becomes empty. And so this is described in the perfection of wisdom also as the natural emptiness. So this is what is understood here. This is called half emptiness. So one has realized the nature of the inner mind, what the inner mind itself is all about. But why is it called half emptiness? It's because one has yet to realize the true nature of external appearances. These are not yet entirely realized. So this is how it is described in the scriptures. Then to progress beyond this, view the essence of mind itself, while at the same time mingling it with the essence of external earth, rocks, and mountains. So this is how one progresses beyond this. There is no discrimination between the earth and rocks over there and your own mind here. Thus, by merging them inseparably and sustaining a state of practice, you see that appearances are like planets and stars reflecting upon the surface of a lake. So when you look at the outer appearances of earth, rocks, and mountains and so on, and then at the same time look at the essence of your mind, you realize that your own mind, there is no delineation between your own mind here and the earth and rocks over there. So it is like the mind and the appearances merge. For example, when you're closing your eyes, then it's like things are still appearing, the surroundings still appear in your mind. So then when you observe outer appearances, it is just like that. It is as though they are appearing in your own mind. Or it is like a reflection in a mirror, for example. You cannot separate the reflection from the mirror. Here, when we're looking at outer appearances of earth and rocks and so on, and then look at the essence of our mind, we find no delineation. Sometimes also when we look outside, it seems that there is these a bindu, so like kind of spheres of light, and it appears as though everything that exists can fit within that, can be encompassed by that. But then in order to really understand it, first in the beginning, when we still cling to the true existence of appearances as they appear to us, first we reflect on the impermanent nature of all appearances. Appearances are compounds and therefore impermanent, empty. So this is how in the beginning we have to reflect, because if we don't reflect about the outer world of rocks and earth and so on in this way, if we just very directly try to merge them, mingle them with our mind, for a beginning practitioner, that will be very difficult to comprehend. Also, this is how I personally feel. And so ultimately, when you think about the nature of the world, it is compounded phenomenon. It is therefore impermanent and will turn into dust, into emptiness. And likewise, your body is impermanent. Your body is an example of the world. It is the same as the world. Just temporarily, for as long as karma and imprints appear, the world appears. until those karmas and imprints come to an end. Until then, the world will remain, we will remain. But the world itself hovers in space. So it is something we should think about very carefully. And so as a meditator, as a practitioner, if you understand this point, then there will be less grasping to the outer world. And then sometimes it will even appear as though it doesn't even exist. It's not even there. And then again, a thought arises. And then again, when thoughts arise, then again, those earth and rocks and so on seem very solid. And then again, when thoughts arise, doubts and so forth will arise. And so especially in the beginning, we need to proceed gradually. So first we have to resolve that appearances are mind, and then we resolve that mind itself is emptiness. If we don't practice in this gradual way, it will be more difficult to comprehend. So the outer universe is an example of the body. It's the same, consisting of the 5 elements on the outer level. Inside, there are the 5 afflictive emotions, and secretly the 5 wisdoms. So the outer world is an example of one's inner body, consisting of earth, water, fire, wind, and space. So your body is the same. The body is impermanent. And still often we think that the world is permanent. It seems so stable and lasting. But actually the world is very small, hovering in the cosmos, being actually very small, just like a thumb. Actually nowadays, science really helps us to understand that. And science also is an aspect of the Buddha's wisdom. We have said that everything that is done in the field of knowable things is done by the Buddha. So they also possess this aspect of wisdom. So if one doesn't attach to the true existence of those outer appearances of earth and rocks and so on, one understands that they appear, but they are impermanent and they are compounded phenomena. So if you understand that, there will be less attachment, less clinging to the true existence of those appearances. And that is when you actually recognize confusion. You recognize that holding on to these things is quite stupid, because it's not real. It is confusion. So the way things appear is one's own mind. This is how we resolve that appearances are one's own mind. So karma ripens. There's 2 ways of karma ripening. First, there is the collective karma. The collective karma and the collective imprints lead to the existence, the creation of the outer world. And then the individual karmas lead to the creation of the individual bodies in the 6 realms of samsara. And these are created due to self-grasping. So in both kinds, the collective karma and the individual karma lead to the creation of what appears due to karma and habitual imprints. They both are created from karma, through karma and habitual imprints. And so who creates those habitual imprints? It is the mind. And what it creates, the outer world, is a compound, lacking any true existence. So this is what one sees when one realizes the nature of the mind as it is described here. And then there is no need to analyze it further. There's just no doubt about this in the mind. And there just naturally is no more grasping. So it is because one has recognized the lack of true existence through the power of one's meditation, one's own wisdom, the view that has arisen within the mind. And so otherwise, it is difficult to understand, because we still otherwise see this solid body and the outer world, the universe, And from that perspective, it is more difficult to comprehend its empty nature. And then it says, although their forms appear individually, you realize their empty nature, their empty essence. And that's an important point. There's two levels of realizing emptiness. And so ideally it is when awareness is mastered, and then clear awareness is able to liberate all these feelings generated by thoughts and afflictive emotions without having to conceptualize those feelings. They just naturally become empty. But then on the other hand, for as long as one hasn't realized the nature of awareness, it is a little bit difficult to come to a state of non-grasping without any conceptualization at all. So that's why there is those two ways of liberating. So ideally, naturally, through the power of the view, without having to even conceptualize thoughts and emotions, they are liberated on their own, unobstructedly. So unobstructedly, for example, means when you are in a building and the building is locked, closed, you might feel that it's closed, but I have to go outside. So there's a barrier between you and the outside. So that is being obstructed. And so unobstructed is when you have realized non-duality, then there is no inner, no outer. So then the mind becomes all penetrating. When awareness has been mastered to perfection, then there is no inner and outer. That is, the mind is unobstructed. And one habituates to that, then one becomes just like Milarepa. So there are these two levels of realizing this.